goes on to say, look at Abraham, from which you came, and from Abraham and Sarah you see that I blessed them. He was just one person, but out of Abraham a multiplicity of blessings has come, a whole people of God. And then more happens. He says in the Old Testament lesson, through Isaiah, look to me, listen to me. You see, God had a point with Abraham, not just to bring the law into the world that people might know how to live, not just to create his own people, but ultimately that there might be salvation. And then the latter part of that scripture speaks of righteousness and justice and salvation and hope. A universal hope. Look to me what I've done through Abraham. Salvation. And then one last looking from Isaiah again. Look to the heavens, to the earth, around you. You see this stuff that you see and you live in? It's all going to vanish like smoke or wear away like a garment. This stuff won't last. Look at it now. It's going to disappear. But my salvation lasts forever. Our gospel lesson. The theme of rocks are taken up again. The rock that's referred to as the confession of Peter. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And upon that identity of Jesus, the church is built. Jesus prefaces it by asking, when people look at me, what are they saying? What do they see in me? Isaiah, Jeremiah, John the Baptist. Well, who do you say that I am? Who do you see when you look at me? The Christ, the Son of the living God. Simon, Peter, you are blessed because this proclamation that came from your mouth did not come from your own logic, your own intelligence, your own imagination or creativity. It was revealed to you by the Father. This is a spiritual, revelatory knowledge. And you are blessed to know me. And so are we. All of us have called Jesus the Christ. I've got a question for you this morning. When you look to Jesus, who do you say that he is? What do you see when you see Jesus? This summer we've been calling him our shepherd, and we're right to call him shepherd and link him to Psalm 23. Jesus himself did that in his preaching, calling himself the good shepherd. What does it mean to call Jesus the shepherd? What are you seeing when you see Jesus as shepherd? A young woman took me out for a walk a while ago, and she shared this story publicly, so I'll just share highlights of it, but it was a highlight for me to have a conversation with somebody who wants to talk about how good God is. And this young woman said, Pastor, God's been so good this past year. You see, she had been living in rebellion the year before, but now she sees how good God has been. And she says, I live in his presence every day. Asking what that meant, we had a wonderful conversation. You know how precious those conversations are? Pastors don't get a lot of those in a year's time, so he grabs those good conversations. They're just precious. I'm sure you can all relate to something like that. We talked it out. What does it mean to live in the presence of God? A number of ideas were surfaced, but two of them I'd like to share with you. One, she said, I wake up each day and everything I do, I try to live now as a follower of Jesus. In other words, as Paul said in our second lesson, my life is now a spiritual sacrifice. I presented my body to God as a living sacrifice, spiritual worship. Her thinking, her words, her deeds, all done now in the light of following Jesus, her shepherd, because Jesus, the shepherd, has guided her how to live, and she wants to follow Jesus, her shepherd. She has no longer looks to the world and pays attention to that voice, that way, that peer pressure, but rather she's been free from that pressure to follow her Christ, and her life is now has a consecrated value to it. She follows her shepherd. Her life is worship. And then she said also, I have gratitude. Looking back after a year, when she was crushed and broken and finally recognized who she had become in her rebellion, she recognized the need for God. She's even very, very grateful for that beautiful moment, as difficult as it was. But she sees now God's hand and His goodness in so many places that she looks. No longer does she look at the crowd that she tried to always please and see their rolled eyebrows or murmuring behind her back. No, she sees now a God, a shepherd, Jesus her Lord, who loves her and guides her, has found her. When she was that lost sheep, He went looking for her, and she's experienced healing, and now she sees goodness in so many places. That's one story. What it means to have Jesus as our shepherd. When you see Jesus, you're looking at Him, what do you see? This young woman named gratitude and guidance. Her life has become worship. We've been naming things with these rocks. And I'm inviting you, this whole summer we've been giving you this invitation, but really every Sunday, every day of our lives, you can pay attention to what you've written on these rocks. You can pay attention and keep looking at it, trying to dissect it, analyze it, and manage these little things that aren't going well in your life. I hope and pray that God actually gives you the wherewithal to name these things and to stand a little apart from it and say, you know, this is not right. Sometimes we don't even have that capacity. We're so caught up into it. This is often where our eyesight can be given to these burdens that we carry. And some of the burdens that we carry have been named in our confession and as we look at Psalm 23. But God finally is inviting us, because of His saving power, to take our eyesight off of these things that so burden us, these things that we're trying to manage and conquer by our own power, and just pay attention to Him. He's inviting you into that saving relationship, a relationship that smacks of victory and healing and wholeness. Hope. One other story. Visited Audrey. She's a shut-in of our church. Lives up in Aitkin, Minnesota, in hospice care. She's had Alzheimer's for a number of years, and I haven't had a real good conversation with her for a number of years because of the Alzheimer's. I wasn't expecting much as far as a visit. I went and began singing those old familiar hymns, which I'm sure she's sung hundreds of times in her life. And I could tell she was tracing those hymns. And at the end of each hymn, usually those great hymns, they talk about heaven. And I would just sum up those words that we just sang and said, Audrey, you know, heaven is soon to be yours. And after the fourth hymn, she looked at me and she said, what do I do? With what, Audrey? Heaven. What do you do for heaven? You trust. You believe that Jesus has paid for your sin, that He loves you, and salvation is yours because of what Jesus has done. You just believe it. You realize what an awesome conversation this is, too? She who has those Alzheimer eyes, you know, that kind of that blank stare, you don't really know where they're And she still had that physical affect about her. Nevertheless, she had the eyes of the soul. She had ears of her spirit that were communicating deep within her. We were having a conversation through that mouth of hers, through that mind of hers. We were having a conversation.